What do you picture when someone says an older person, a young boy with autism, or a male, a female, a scientist? All of these are strong examples of bias that we are seeing in AI. And that is, if you ask AI to generate a particular image of someone, it's sourcing all of society biases that you might be able to find online and then implementing that into pictures. And even more worryingly, it's actually giving different information in terms of the text back to different audiences, depending on whether you're male, female, younger, older, have SEND, and a whole range of other attributes. And that's exactly what we're going to be going through today with Victoria, or Bias Girl, looking at the bias that exists in AI, why that is potentially so harmful, and what can be done to mitigate it. Now, I highly recommend that you watch this video on YouTube rather than just listen, because for each example, we're actually going to show you as well what is generated by AI for each of the different scenarios. But that's it for now. Let's jump into the episode. So welcome, Victoria, to the podcast, and thank you so much for agreeing to come on. And I'll just hand over to you to introduce people who may not have come across you before already, but into AI bias.
Well, thank you for having me on. Hi, yeah, it's well, like you, I started as a science teacher. I'm a physicist. I did physics at university, which I loved. I've always been interested in planets and stars and particles mainly. So I went to do that. And then I did a bit of climate dynamics research at Oxford and enjoyed that for a bit. And then I decided that I was spending lots of time making things look nice rather than actually doing the research. So I thought, why am I not engaging with this? And I thought, actually, I think I'm more interested in working with people, raising their scientific literacy and understanding of the world, than I am kind of sitting in a room researching on my own, which some people, but I was not enjoying that at that time. So I went into teaching. I was a teaching assistant. I worked in a SEND department for a year, quite disadvantaged school. So that opened my eyes. I really believe that that's when I learned to teach, when I was a teaching assistant, because I observed everybody and everything. And you get to really engage with the children when you're a teaching assistant in the way that you can't when you're a teacher, because you've got just the sheer quantity of children that you're dealing with as a teacher. So I learned a lot there. And that's, I think, really when I started to become aware of biases in different forms. And then I became a teacher and I taught for a while, did various different roles and responsibilities, teaching physics. Then I moved location when I met my husband, and I moved to London, and I'm a Northamptonshire girl, so that was very scary. But I've learnt to become obsessed with getting upset if the tube is more than 1 minute late now. Yeah. I've learnt to run for it, so I feel like I've adapted to big city life over the years. Yeah. And then I taught for a bit, and then I became a teacher educator. I was lucky. I just contacted lots of different universities and said, anybody want a physicist? Been doing some teacher educator stuff in my role as teacher. I quite like this. I see the bigger issues. At the same time, or just before that, I'd started a PhD where I'd become kind of quite confident with my practice in the classroom and aware of kind of bigger systemic issues within education. And I was thinking, I want to make more change than my classroom. And I was very, very aware of how the engagement. I worked at a girls' school, worked mixed and at a girls' school, but towards the end of teaching, I was at a girls' school for quite some time. And I was really interested in STEM and gender and how they engaged, what they engaged with, where their identities and attitudes and things came from. So I spent quite a lot of time there. My PhD was looking at ways to engage girls in physics. By that, I mean, I was kind of looking at physics is perceived as quite objective and hard and cold and factual. I believe that science is quite value laden. So you look at science with your own value laden lens. So I was looking at using art, getting children, this is what my PhD was about, looking at getting them to think about an aspect of physics they just studied and then create a work of art on it, getting them to reflect on it and talking about how that represents or doesn't represent their identities and the choices that they've made. And that was really, really valuable. And I really appreciate the students that I used there for the case studies because they were very honest. But that got me thinking about larger biases, specifically around gender and science. So I took that into being a teacher educator. I worked at 3 different universities on PGCs and being a lecturer of education. And I enjoyed that. That was great. I got to do quite a lot of science identity work with trainees there, which is Louise Archer's work, looking at how science is more than just teaching kids facts. It's about their lived experience and their personalities and their interests and how you can bring those into the classroom. So that's quite a recent body of work that's kind of infiltrated. And I know the Association for Science Education has taken that on and promoted that quite a lot as well. So that's good to see. And then basically I was doing that, and then a massive great whiteboard fell on me when I was lecturing and nearly killed me and damaged some of my vertebrae and my arm. And it kind of made me think, I need to do what I want to do. That was going on in the background. And at the same time, ChatGPT came out, and I started playing with ChatGPT and just trying some of the things that I picked up from my observations during teaching and my PhD. And I noticed very early on that it had said, I just asked it to explain how a light bulb lights up to a girl and then to a boy, because I know this is one of the issues that was there in physics education, how things are explained to different genders. So I thought, just see what AI does with this. And then it produced these two different explanations. It mirrored our biases as a society, I suppose. And I thought, well, this is just early days, isn't it? It's just a new technology. And so I was expecting, as models improve, for that to go, and it hasn't. And so basically from that, I think it was about 2023, about 2 years ago, from that point, I became obsessed with testing it, because if you're scientific, AI is like a little experiment, isn't it? You can put things in, and then you can put an input in, and you can look at the output, and you can start conjecturing as to what's happening inside the black box. So I think as teachers, we are naturally wired to be both amazed, scared, and amused by AI. And then from that, I randomly started posting on LinkedIn, which I didn't know anything about. And then I was presenting at a conference last summer, and I think it was David, one of my friends on there, just said, "Oh, you're the bias girl." And I thought, you know what, I've got to take that. So then I've made myself a little persona as the bias girl.
I love it.
And then since then, it's taken over my existence, really. And I'm writing a book to talk about later. So I now do that full time, kind of researching and training and educating teachers with bias and how we can mitigate, and testing the new models, which is the most exciting bit. So yeah, so it's a very long explanation of my life story there. It makes sense now.
Exactly. And I came across you probably in the last month, because I think when we spoke previously, I have a previous podcast episode with Alex, and he was talking about your work. And straight after I filmed that with Alex, I was like, I need to go check out Bias Girl and find this video. And just straight away, there were things I'd not even considered. And to be fair, I'd not really used ChatGPT and other models much for generating images. But you were saying as well as the explanation. So it's not just image bias, it's actual text bias as well. If they identify a difference in, well, I guess gender's one aspect. But what are like some of the key main test areas and that you've been looking at for? Is there bias linked to, well, sex, so male or female? What other areas have you noticed like strong bias in? It's
quite interesting, and this is ongoing work, because obviously the model's developed. So we've just had the new Geminis, and we've had the new ChatGPT, but that hasn't changed that much, 5.1 from 5, which is not that much different to 4.0 in terms of the bias. It's just a little, but Gemini 3 seems to be quite significantly different, but I'll talk about that later. But the biases that I found the most prominent, and I think this is well documented as well with UNESCO work and other people that have researched in this area, there are a few of us. You've got gender, that's a big one. You've got race, which is a big one. You've got age, which is quite a big one. Try getting an accurate picture of an elderly person. It makes them all look like, what's it called, the Thursday Murder Club on Netflix, that series. That's something I quite like. But they're all affluent, healthy, predominantly white, elderly people. It's like a ginormous Bupa advert. So it's not representative of, obviously, the different ages, cultures, body styles, disabilities, aging, all those aspects, and, the skin and things like that. I guess there's not much in the training data in terms of diversity there. I've noticed also BMI is a huge one. So there's quite a lot of biases that people don't even realise are there, because they think, oh, it's a person. Things like gender and race are quite easy, because you can easily see whether that's diverse or not. But if you look at kind of the BMI, most of the images that are returned, and I'm just talking images here, are of the perfect BMI. You don't get larger BMIs, you don't get the BMIs, which is quite important when we think about body image and adolescents and children as well. Another one is disadvantage or social class. It will usually default to placing people kind of like in an affluent park or something like that. You won't get placed in more diverse neighbourhoods. And then, the quality of clothes will be quite high and they look well nourished. And there's certain markers there that make assumptions on who the norm or the audience is. And also some of the smaller biases that people don't realise are things like expression. So piercing, tattoos, different hairstyles, patterned clothing, asymmetric hair. You don't get that. You get it's vanilla, very vanilla set of assumptions that come out. And so predominantly I'm working on trying to make people specifically realise, because the really obvious biases will occur to educators to mitigate against, but it's all the little assumptions as well. Like, I'm not sure if you saw, I did a post about a month ago now on make an image of a person who's living on welfare, and it put them all in grey and they were all in miserable houses with wallpaper hanging off, and then it would have a set of things on the table in front of them, like a plastic bottle and some wrappers and a bill, and one of them actually put a McDonald's Happy Meal on there, or they'd be on a park bench with the same plastic bag. So there's all these assumptions. You think, gosh, that's really interesting for us as a society. Like, if you sum over the data set that we've got, is that what we've amounted to for what welfare means? So those kind of assumptions are really important if you're using teacher-facing or student-facing AI, but more so, I think, if you're using student-facing AI in secondary school where you're working, or in a university where you're going to be asking students to be working on an AI. Perhaps they might be doing a portrait of themselves or putting themselves in the World War I trenches, or, something like that, which can seem like a really innocent, engaging task, and it can be, but it will also have a whole heap of assumptions about who the person is when it's embedding them in that image. For instance, my son is, all of us in our house are all neurodiverse, and that's a strong part of his identity. So he's gone to secondary school, and I know if he'll be working with AI, if he's talking about himself, he will be typing that in alongside, I'm a boy, I'm 12, I'm neurodiverse, I like Minecraft, things like that. I need to know if he's going to type that in and use that for his schoolwork. It's not then going to non-affirming or images that could impact his identity or well-being. I don't want him to be getting images which portray him in a negative light. There's quite a lot wrapped up in what seems to be a very simple idea, and that's just images. Yeah. If we then move on to the textual part of it, and this is somewhere where I want to research some more as well. It's not as obvious. So things like Somalian students, because there's not a very big data set drawn from Somalian students, it will associate scenarios and stories with pirates and things like that. So you're going to, if you're looking at career paths or exam choices or writing a story about your heritage, you don't want that coming up unless that's specifically what they want, do you? So there's those kind of less obvious things that you're not going to see if you're walking around checking everybody's screen, whereas you might, if it was an image, you can easily say, oh, well, that's not representative of you. But so there's all these little unwritten rules and little chips that could be a way of a child's identity and their self-belief, which you wouldn't be aware of as a teacher. So that's predominantly where I'm sitting in that space at the moment.
And I hadn't been aware of it at all. It makes a lot of sense now because it's drawing everything from online, and there's going to be biases out there. So of course it makes sense now I think about it, but I was just completely unaware. And it's like you said, the ones that are really visually clear that you can see, oh, well, we are just showing this, we're just showing that. It's obvious to maybe point out to students, but particularly with the text as well, I never would have considered to think, well, let's say if this student is saying, I am X, Y, and Z, this is my background, I'd like you to help me understand this concept. And if they're being given the information in a completely different format to another student, because they might assume, I don't know, you're female, so you're not going to understand physics, or you are on welfare, so you're not going to get the same support at home, so you're not going to understand things as clearly. They might get a very different level of explanation. And if this isn't known over time, you're going to see an even bigger gap between students progressing and not, just because of bias that already exists in the society. So that's the major worry, and that's what drives me, is that we sit in a system of inequality already. We know that in education, and there's a lot of people working very hard to try and address that. I'd argue all teachers try and address that. So, and I think where there is a teacher choice, I'm confident that teachers will upscale, be aware of biases and learn to mitigate against them. I think one of my biggest problems is where the agency is taken away from the teachers and
embedded within a program where a child is left alone and the teacher doesn't know what decisions are being made. So, for example, I'm experimenting at the moment for my research. I've just made a mock-up register of 30 children's names. They're all anglicised names to try and reduce the racial impact as well. But that's another piece of research that needs to be done. And then I'm giving it a piece of work, and then I'm asking for it to give feedback for each student on the register. So I'm not specifically prompting any names. I'm asking it to pull it from the register, trying to emulate what might be there in a learning management system or Google Classroom. I don't know if that does that, or where there's a link where the teacher doesn't realise gender or race or whatever is being inferred from a data store, and then I'm asking it to give feedback on the child's work. It's all exactly the same work. Like everything's exactly the same. It's just exactly the same. And then next steps. And then I'm trying to break that down, and then an assessment as well. So what I found so far is that you will get, and this is just with ChatGPT at the moment. I haven't done it with Gemini, but I will do it with the other ones as well. It's a huge piece of work. So it's going to take me a while to kind of do it in a way that's robust. Is that for girls, it will give you more, for next steps, it will give you more recall questions rather than analysis or synthesis or evaluation, or if we think about our old school Bloom, we're right down there at the bottom of the pyramid. Whereas for the boys, it will give them more application, or, kind of midway, just slightly higher up in the pyramid. And then for the next tasks that it will set, girls will get things like basic understanding, kind of retrieval kind of questions, or creative activities, design this, make that. Builds into this idea that girls are kind of nurturing and creative and designers, whereas the boys will get synthesis and application and basically harder level questions, that they don't get this kind of more effective aspect of what their next task should be. So it's not ideal for either gender. It's not just, oh, I'm a girl, so I'm trying to make things better for girls. These assumptions are not good for either sex, because, a lot of boys will want to do a creative task, or it would benefit them to do a creative task, and other girls, it might benefit them to do some more evaluation or synthesis or whatever. So it seems to me in my trials that's what's happening. So just going back to your point there about the same starting point and the two very different finishing points, if you imagine that embedded in an AI tutor, which I think is the way that teaching is going to go, then each tiny little decision that's being made like that's automated, how do you know that that's not compounding to this massive equity divide? And so that's where I think there's a body of work that needs to be done for teachers in terms of upskilling them. There needs to be transparency in the ed tech companies in their tools, which some of them have, a lot of them don't, but some of them have. You need to be able to see, and I always say that I reckon a teacher's going to become a pathway manager. I think a large part of our jobs moving forwards will be looking at the decisions and the pathways that the AI has made for each student and assessing whether they're equitable or not, because I don't see how else it can work if it's not to make a massive great it's going to just compound inequities otherwise. So it's a huge systematic shift, both in terms of your practice and the technology and the oversight that I think you're going to need to have. And then I think within schools, in terms of a leadership culture, there will be people that oversee the pathway managers, like a bias and equity manager who will make sure for each class that the decisions that are being made by the technology are robust. In the same way that if we had 10 different teachers and we'd noticed that one of the teachers was really sexist, that would be a leadership issue, wouldn't it, to sort that out of training, whatever. I think the same needs to happen with tools. And I worry because it's a tool, it's like a calculator. People don't realise that there's these same impacts. And it all sits behind the guise of personalisation. So the very thing that makes it wonderful and brilliant and could help a lot of children, the fact that it can adapt, because of the biases embedded within it, mean that it can actually do the opposite. So those students that may arguably benefit the most from it are also the most likely to be at risk from inequitable outcomes due to the biases. So I always say that teachers should have it'd be quite easy to make a bias risk register. We know the intersect of gender, race, social class. It's we've got that information, or send. We've got that information, so you can be more aware of what decisions are being made. And it's also a very good, if you can do that, you don't need to do that to children. You can make them part of the process. And a lot of teachers that engage on LinkedIn with me with their feedback, that they involve the children in their class in looking at the really bad biased outputs and talking about where they come from, why they're there. So it's upskilling, and you're modeling to the students as you go on, not to blindly trust the output of AI, which is also essential.
And have you noticed any differences between the different programs? So like ChatGPT, Gemini, Canva AI, Copilot, any of those? Like, do any seem to be more biased than others, or is it a bit of a mix?
Yeah, they have different profiles in different biases and with different prompts. And this is a lot of work needs to be done here going forwards, I think. And that's why the community we've got is great, because we basically, I don't know if you can say crowdsource, educator source, I don't know. I've got to find a new terminology for it. People try things and then kind of it makes us more aware of what works and what doesn't. But ChatGPT is absolutely terrible with neurodiversity. If you ask it to create a picture of an autistic child, it puts a miserable looking white dark-haired child who looks upset actually, or frustrated or angry. It puts him sitting on the floor, staring at the floor usually, sometimes like this, normally in a blue t-shirt, and one of them even put autistic child on the t-shirt. It actually labelled him. If you prompt create an image of a child, it'll create an image of a happy, smiling child in yellow. And sometimes you can get girls, although it does, for me, always return still white children. And I've done that over multiple iterations. So it's obviously, because it's probabilistic, you can't just take one and say that's what it does. You've got to look over quite a large range. And so it's terrible for that. Whereas Gemini is much better. Gemini has more neurodiversity affirming ideas of what neurodiversity is. It will place people in different locations with different interests, or it just won't treat them any different from any child, which I think is probably what it should do. If you type in an any child, it should just return Gemini. I also did a trial in terms of Gemini versus ChatGPT in terms of sexuality. And Gemini very much takes that into the image and seems to have this assumption that your identity is something worth celebrating, which is a decision. That's a decision. Whereas ChatGPT takes the position that your identity is yours and it shouldn't represent it unless you specifically ask for that. So I'm not saying either position is right or wrong, but they're two very different positions, which is something you want to consider if you're using it with children. Canva seems to be a lot better in the trials that I've done and other people have done in our community, because it will return about 4 different images, and it seems to, because it pulls across multiple different image models, whereas obviously ChatGPT and Gemini, they have their own image models that they pull from. Because Canva pulls across different ones, you'll get more of a variety. So in terms of race and gender, and it's actually much better at age. So a few people in the community have started to post those. So it's looking like that is probably a better thing to use if you're looking for images to use with your class or for children to work with as well. Copilot, I'm not a fan of Copilot. Copilot is obviously pulls from, well, it used to be OpenAI's models, but now it can access Gemini as well. So that's just a mishmash of whether it pulls from which of those two. So I just discount that, and because it's but generally that's been well down on my list for everything. Copilot, when I did the initial test, that was absolutely horrific. If you asked it to create an image of a scientist or physicist, mathematician, economist, somebody on LinkedIn told me the other day, for a successful journalist, all of those are white men, middle-aged. It's that normative idea that's pulled out again. But yeah, it doesn't look like things are getting a huge amount different. Like with the new Gemini, what I found is the reasoning seems to be higher, and you can see the reasoning. It actually reasons itself into being more biased. If you ask it to do a boy and explain something to a boy and a girl, I think what's happening is it realizes it's comparative, a boy and a girl, or old and young, and then it thinks, right, I need to show this difference. Yeah. And then it starts to pull in narrative metaphor, and that's where everything falls apart when you start to pull in narrative metaphor, because that's when it just goes straight into its bias assumptions. Girls like unicorns, boys like robots, things like that. So yeah, there's a lot of work that needs to be done there, and I'm trying to make, it's one on my never-ending list of things to do. I'm trying to make a comparison board. I've got a little leaderboard thing that I'm trying to put on my website that I'll be doing. Hopefully, be up in a few months, where it'll give teachers a bit more evidence and control and insight as to what the different tools offer and what they're good at or not good at. But obviously, I've got to generate evidence to substantiate any claims, which just takes quite a bit of time. So, yeah.
And then your book, is your book out now or is it just about to come out?
Wednesday.
Whoa.
That's why I'm looking tired, because I've been up all night editing the book.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, when this goes live, that means the book will be out, because Wednesday, then that's the 27th of November. So yeah.
Oh, not this Wednesday. Sorry, next Monday. Sorry, Wednesday. I've got to get it. I've got to get it all sorted by tomorrow, and then it's Monday the 1st. It goes out. Yeah.
That should be the day that this episode goes live. So yeah, the book is out.
Day.
So what's your book about then?
So our book is a community sourced book. I'm editing it. I've got a couple of bits in it, but it's pulled from people, practitioners, and people within education, kind of represent what everybody's doing around bias. So the premise is that bias is in Ofsted's document on how they are going to assess your use of AI. It's up there alongside safeguarding and GDPR. Bias is up there, and it talks about how you're going to mitigate and be aware of risks. So I've tried to create a book. It's called AI Bias in Education, and it just dissects bias in all of its guises. So we look at some of the things we've been talking at: where bias appears, how it appears, where it comes from, what you can do about it, what are some practical strategies, some of the underlying, there are some technical bits in there as well, but it's not all of it's technical. So, but it's upskilling kind of technical rather than just a bunch of equations. So, although I do like equations, don't get me wrong. So it's aimed for educators and leaders, really, so people can get an idea of what bias is and they can dip in and out of it. And all of the people that have contributed to it have given practical tips and advice, and I've pulled them all together at the end to kind of create a toolkit or a guide of what you can do to try and mitigate against bias. So the idea being that it'll be the go-to guide. People will be like, what shall I do? I'll look at that. And it reflects some of the experiences of early adopters and people that are experimenting now as well. So it's taken a lot of work, and we've got people from all over the world actually contributing to it, and different classrooms. We've got some big names. We've got Al Kingsley. We've got Professor Miles Berry, we've got Matthew Weems, we've got Dan Fitzpatrick, who's doing the foreword. Who else have we got in there? We've got some people who work in EdTech as well that have contributed to it. And we've got people in higher education, we've got people in primary schools, secondary schools. Got a really interesting piece in there on AI gender bias and how it represents athletes and the impact on sports, which hadn't occurred to me at all. We've got obviously a couple of bits in there on race. We've got a student who's written a chapter alongside their teachers and leaders. So hopefully you can kind of dip in and out of it, but you could also read it entirety, and it's driven by a few really important questions, kind of looking at how bias shapes the knowledges that you and I and the students get. It's not just a comparison. It's what is worthy knowledge? Who does it reflect? How does it impact identity? And also, how does it impact attainment and well-being? Not just attainment, which is the trap that we fall into with education and metrics, isn't it? We forget about the whole child and they just get turned into a number. So yeah, it's a large piece of work, and hopefully it's going to be the start of some, conversations moving forwards. At least there will be something there now. So yeah, it's a very good book. I can recommend it.
Yeah, it sounds incredibly helpful, because I'm sure lots of people have been listening to this either aware or not aware that these biases existed on AI, and then their next thought would be, well, what am I going to do about it then? Because I don't want to be reinforcing this even more and putting the students at risk or doing this in my lessons. So it sounds like an amazing go-to then for them to get ideas, strategies, like you said, to mitigate it, as well as your LinkedIn. So I'm going to definitely link the book in the description, but your LinkedIn as well.
Thank you.
I found that so fascinating, just when I'm on it, just seeing the next one pop up, because it's quite visual, the pictures ones that I see. I'm like, I wouldn't have thought of that, but I can totally see that would be society's bias. Yeah. And as an adult, I might be able to reason and reflect on this. But as a student, if you're just being told this is what you are, and it could be very, very damaging. So yeah, I highly recommend, if you don't already follow Victoria, definitely do on LinkedIn, because it is a really interesting and reflexive selection of things that you post. So yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I mean, if you join, do comment on the post as well, because we organically grow and test. We've got a really great community there. I've got a newsletter, and then I link to people's work from the newsletter as well. So it's very much a growing community of people. So yeah, it'd be nice. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for coming on today. That was really, really helpful for me, but also I'm sure for many, many other people listening as well. And yeah, I'll link everything in the description. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
So much there to think about, and hopefully you've got loads of ideas of what you can now do to be aware of in your teaching. And don't forget, you can click the links in the description to get hold of Victoria and all the other collaborators' book, and check her out on LinkedIn.